Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today's video is a bonus video, and I wanted to show you guys a few art supplies that I was given a chance to try out from Etchr Lab. So we have the watercolor pad and colored fine liners and brush pens that they have sent me. So here's the watercolor pad. Now this pad is actually a watercolor block with hot press paper, which is in the A5 size, and these are the colored fine liners and brush pens. So going into both of these products, I kind of had an idea of what I was getting into. To be honest, for the little brush pens, I thought they were actually double-ended, but they're actually individual pens. So 16 is actually just because there's 8 and 8. They do have the same different colors for both of them. This one is brush pens and the other one is the fine liners. They are attached to these cards, so you could let them sit out kind of just on their own rather than being attached to the card, and it does open up into this nice little kind of case for them. So here is the kind of fine liner tip, which is 0.5, which I believe is 1 millimeter, as well as it creates a 0.48 millimeter line. And then this is the brush tip. Okay, so now this is the watercolor pad, and like I mentioned, it is actually a watercolor block, meaning that once we open it up, you'll see that on the very sides of pretty much all 4 of the sides, they are completely glued together, and basically this allows the paper pad to be worked on without needing to tape it down to a surface, and you have to worry less about kind of like the buckling of the water and stuff, and you can paint right up to the edge. You can see in the top left hand corner, it's not gummed all the way, meaning that's where you're going to be able to stick a palette knife or an X-Acto knife through so you can release the paper from the stack itself. It does have 16 pages. Probably should have mentioned that earlier. But let's get on to the swatches first, and we can talk a bit more about the paper and stuff once we start to work on it. So I'm just doing the swatches on cardstock, and I have a smudge test for each of them. So we have gray, yellow, dark green, sky blue, violet, rose, brown, and red for the color selection, and that is both for the brush tip and the fine liners. So yeah, I wanted to test out whether or not these are fully waterproof. I know some products say they are, but then they're not truly. But these ones have no pigment being moved around from the water, which means I can safely work on the watercolor paper without worrying about the ink smudging into my piece. So for a watercolor block, you're not going to be able to transfer your drawings like the same way as you might if you have like single loose leaf sheets. So because it is gummed all the way around, you're not going to be able to use like a light pad or a light box or anything like that to transfer your sketch. If you want to, you can probably use carbon paper or have your sketch on a separate piece of paper, rub graphite on the back, and use a ballpoint pen on top to transfer your sketch. But for me, I'm just going to basically sketch directly onto the watercolor paper itself, and then once I'm done with the sketch, we can erase it a little bit and then do our line work. Okay, so I was a little bit nervous using the fine liners. I think you guys already are quite familiar with the fact that I don't really like using line work very much in my pieces. For kind of 2 reasons mostly. One, I prefer the softer look, and being able to match the colors a little bit closely is much easier, not being restricted to like pen colors, especially like a lot of fine liners nowadays. Kind of like they're still more or less like in the neutral tones. Luckily for these ones, they do have a nice variety of different colors you could tailor your line work to. So I decided to paint Ayato today, if you couldn't tell. I do have a gripe with my own drawing, by the way. So Ayato's nose is a little bit too far down than I would have liked it, so it makes his face look a little bit longer. But I'm going to be basically doing like 4 illustrations today so that you guys can have a better look at the performance of each of the products separately and together. So the first 2 drawings will be me using the products together, so the fine liner and the brush pens directly on this paper, and then I'll do some testing on the paper and then the fine liners on its own. So I tried my best to include the majority of the fine liner colors. Now you can see that I did not use the brush pen for this. I actually did a separate illustration for that. But now that I have the line work done, actually I didn't talk about why I didn't want my second reason why I didn't like using fine liners. I just don't like being restricted to line work too much, and I get very scared of making things look a little bit too rigid just because I don't think I have a knack for doing line work very fluidly. So it's just something I should practice on in the future, but for now, I won't focus on it too much. But for the drawing, I am using watercolor, so these are majority like Holbein paints and like a mixture of a bunch of different ones. I have like Grumbacher, some of like, I don't even remember the other brands, Winsor & Newton as well, so kind of like 3 to 4 different brands right here. I tried to keep a lot of the colors a little bit more on the muted side because I did still want the line work to stand out to a certain degree. So these colors are very much like, other than the yellow, they're kind of in the mid-tone range. The yellow is almost like highlighter yellow. Like I could imagine people using it maybe if you're doing like drafting or something, using that as like your base sketch if you want to use them for sketching, and then using any of the other colors as a accenting color to help with the yellow, because the yellow doesn't stand out too much. I think it's probably good if you're using it for something you don't want the color to stand out too much anyways. But I tried to match the colors to certain elements, and I thought Arrtx would have been the best choice because I could include most likely like either light blue flowers or maybe sakuras, and then I could include his light blue hair, and then we can have some darker areas. But because I wanted the line work to stand out a little bit more, I did not push the values too much. So I'm going to try my best to do that in some other pieces. I think my third piece I pushed the darks a little bit more, so you can see how much the paper is able to hold up with the amount of water I'm using. So from my experience of just using the paper, it's very easy to work on for the most part. I did notice that if you look really closely to the paper, there is a little bit more of a patterning compared to some other hot press papers that I've used. To me, it didn't really affect like me using it, so there's not really of an issue. Also, here you can see I'm using an X-Acto knife to kind of cut away at where that little edge is so that we can free the sheet from the rest of the batch. And then once we free this one, we can use the next sheet underneath. My X-Acto knife's a little bit on the smaller end at the moment, so it's hard for me to cut. But for the most part, the glue is adhesive enough that it can stick all the papers together into a block, but it's super easy to cut with a knife, a palette knife, X-Acto knife, anything that you have to free it from the stack. So here's Arrtx. You can see that it didn't like warp too much. And I decided to go back in with the little bit of the brush marker to help darken up some areas, just because I do like having a certain amount of contrast in my illustrations whenever I'm doing something like this. And I feel like that's my only real gripe with this set. I do wish they included a black or even just like a dark gray, just because we can use that to layer with the other colors, or if you have a black, you can definitely use it alongside with the other ones as well. And you could probably make some really nice color combinations, but for the most part, I actually do like the color variation that you can get. So the second illustration I did of my OC Saki, and I did do the line work with the brush pen, and I layered the brown and the purple because these are water-based. The more you go over one area, they do go a little bit darker. So me layering the brown and the dark purple kind of gave me a little bit something closer to a black, which definitely made it a little bit easier for me to have some tonal variation in the line work itself. And I did that with watercolor, kept everything kind of more of a neutral color palette for the most part. And now we are moving on to just focusing on the individual product that they have sent me. So I decided to paint Finana, who is a VTuber from the Jisanji En, and I wanted to play around with the color palette a little bit. Or not the color palette, I just really like the color of her hair, so I decided to do her I don't know how you explain this outfit. It's basically her 2.0 outfit, I guess. And I did the sketch in the Pilot Color Eno, and then I switched to the Prismacolor Colerase, and then you can see that I'm trying to lightly erase, and I'm basically just erasing the Pilot Color Eno color, and then now all is left is pretty much the Prismacolor Colerase, which is what I basically just need. And I forgot a few lines because I noticed that they disappeared, but this should be enough to give me an indication of where I'm able to put down my colors and my values with watercolor without worrying it kind of dissolving on me. Okay, so for the paper, because I'm trying to think if I did this for Arrtx. I don't think I did. So for Masaki and Finana, I did do a larger wash all over the entire kind of like larger area of the piece of paper, or like the color block, because I wanted to kind of change the color of the temperature a little bit. But I did notice that the buckling wasn't too drastic around the whole thing, but the top left hand corner where you're able to free your paper using like a knife or anything, it did show a little bit more lifting and curling, which kind of makes me feel like I wish they put the gum around the corner still. I think in the beginning you would have saw that the corner of the block looked like it got bumped a little bit, whether or not it was from transit or being in like packaging and stuff. It can get damaged. I kind of wish they had the gum kind of on the inner seam, but also like near like the center, so that the corners are still going to be protected by that gum, whatever it is that's kind of sealing the edges. That's my only gripe. It's very small because it's not really noticeable. I just noticed it a little bit once like everything started to dry. You can see the corner just lift up a little bit. But when I look at my pieces, actually let me grab them right now since I do have them in front of me, and looking at them, they're all curling the same amount in the same spot, which is in the top left hand corner because of where it's not gummed. So I do wish that it was on the center left side maybe, because the way how you open up the pad, it would be like on the inside, so I feel like it would have been more protected and the buckling would be more even. So like I said, the buckling isn't like throughout the whole piece, it's literally just the one corner that kind of curls up, especially when drying. So that's my only thing. For the most part, like for the price and the size, I think this is a perfect way to, if you would like to paint on the go, so you don't have to tape down your pieces onto a surface, or even if you just enjoy painting and you don't want to paint, like you don't want to set up a board or tape it to your desk or anything, this is definitely a good alternative to painting without needing to tape down your piece. So, and it gives you a little bit more mobility. So let's say if you painted a piece and you have it taped to your desk, you're not going to be able to rotate your piece at all. So having it taped down to a surface might be a little bit easier, but having it on a block, I think you're able to carry it around wherever you need to, so that you don't have to worry about having your edges kind of buckling as you're working, which is really nice, because I personally been usually adding a whole wash to the entire piece, and having the sides being completely gummed makes it a lot easier for your paper to dry super easily and evenly, because you don't have to worry about maybe pieces of your tape kind of lifting as you're working, and then when you try to tape it back down, your paper is already kind of warped. And then for the line work, so once I had fineliner pretty much all painted, I did add a light yellow similar to the one I did of Saki, because I was thinking I could get a higher contrasting painting, but I decided to not do that. You'll see me go back and forth between painting like the base colors and stuff and then doing the line work. So at this point I did the majority of the colors and what I thought would have been my finished piece for just coloring in general, and then I work into the line work. And because my line work, I'm still matching the colors, but I like to make the line work a little bit darker. It made everything else look too light, so I'm gonna go back in and kind of darken up some areas so that we can have higher areas of contrast, especially in like some areas that need a little bit more shadow, if anything. And it made her face look a little bit too pale, so I am gonna be adding a little bit more warmer tones near under her eyes and around her cheeks, and especially where her hair is kind of like covering her face. In the future, I'll definitely do more watercolor videos for you guys, because I want to get back into watercoloring a little bit more, and I would like to do a little bit more of like ambitious pieces. Maybe we'll see. I'm definitely gonna see and browse around their store a little bit to see if I can grab another hot press paper block, because hot press paper is like the paper that I've been really liking lately, more so than like cold press paper. I've used cold press paper pretty much the entirety of my watercolor experimentation, I guess, if that makes sense. Up until I think end of university, I was able to use hot press paper because I bought it from the art store at some point by accident, and I said I didn't really like it. which makes me sad because I believe I cut them up into like little squares so I could do practice, but I kind of wish I kept it quite large so we could work on a larger piece. But yeah, here's Finana, and I'm showing you guys the little curling of the one edge. Like I said, it's not like a deal breaker for me, but I do wish that it was in the center of the seam rather, so we can keep all the corners kind of protected. So I'm deciding that I'm going to change my X-Acto knife's little blade because it got really short so that I can easily cut this. You can see this went really smooth and I was able to free Finana from the little batch. So here's Ayato, Masaki, and Finana. So this is the 3 different paintings that I did on the paper. I think it's really great paper, by the way. It is, actually let me read it really quick. So it is wood pulp A5 paper block, and it is hot press, meaning that it has very little texture, little to no texture, which is my favorite. It is also 140 pounds, acid free, and yeah, that's basically it. Everything about it I pretty much like. I had no problems using it. Colors lifted when they needed to. I was able to work very smoothly. Everything dried quite consistently. Yeah, so I actually had a wonderful time using it. But like I said, I wanted to showcase the markers as well separately, like alone from the paper itself. So I decided to crack open my sketchbook to do some drawings just with the fine liners and the brush pens, and I decided to pick kind of 3 colors each for the 2 different drawings that I'm going to be doing. So for the first little doodle drawing, whatever you want to call it, I decided to draw Tinari because I think the day that I was drawing this, I think it was like a day or 2 before his birthday. By the time I think this video comes out, it's gonna be after his birthday. But I decided to choose brown and green, which I think kind of fits Tinari's color palette, and I decided to throw in purple because I know I liked layering the purple and the brown together to kind of get a darker color. And I noticed if you layer all 3, you actually get a nice range. So I was using it to help kind of push the values a little bit because Tinari's hair is kind of like greenish black. So I wanted to be able to push the values to be a little bit darker. And you'll see when I do like some of the other dark areas that are more of like a really dark navy blue, I'm layering all 3 colors, and you can see a kind of cool looking kind of shape, or like, I don't know how to explain it. You can see it in his shoulder and kind of like the one arm that's kind of crossing like over right under his chin. I think that looks kind of fun being able to layer the colors like that because like the colors are very much visible, but they're layered up nicely in a way that kind of produces like a smoother area. And I just really like how it looks, and I think layering the colors like this kind of makes it a little bit more fun because you have each of the colors kind of peeking through, but if you blend them all together you can kind of get a black color for the most part. So I decided to draw him with a sealy, a little bit of a flower crown just to make him a little bit fancier for his birthday. So yeah, that is Tinari and a little green sealy named Moss. And just to choose another 3 colors, I will see if I can remember to post the reference. I found a reference on Pinterest for the pose because I didn't know how to do this kind of action pose that I wanted. So I'm drawing Goro for the next one, and I'm going to be actually using the primary colors to do this. Now I kind of forgot that the yellow is super kind of highlightery-ish, so it's not going to work out in my favor technically for Goro's color palette, but for the most part it's going to be mostly red and blue being the main colors. I decided to sketch everything with the red first, and then we'll add blue as an accent color and helping darken up some of those red parts to be more purple, and then we'll use yellow as kind of just like accent color, not really contributing to darkening anything up, but it kind of fills in some of those areas that I wanted to be covered. So for both, I started off with the fine liner, if anything. I think I did the fine liner for the majority of Goro until we started to shade in everything, because the fine liner is great for more consistent lines as well as being able to work with smaller details. And the thing I didn't really talk about for the brush tip is that the brush tip isn't like super bulky. So I actually prefer this kind of brush tip because it's a little bit less daunting. So if you guys worked with a brush tip marker before, sometimes if you press too, like, wow, I'm talking like if I have a lisp right now. If you press too hard, sometimes the squishier nibs make such a thick line super abruptly, so you need a lot of like hand control. For this one, you can still get those thicker lines if you press like near the side or if you go fully down with the brush itself. But because the tip itself is kind of more narrow, a little bit more fine, it's much easier to get a lot of the finer details, which was fun to do for, I think, Tinari's like eyeline area. And I was able to use it a little bit in like for Saki, a little bit for the areas of like Ayato to darken up some of the corners really easily. I also noticed that for the brush tip, the material for the brush tip did not fray at all, which gives me high hopes that these will last quite a bit of time. I know a lot of people who use like brush tips that are a little bit more like spongy-ish. I feel like you use them a little bit and they kind of lose their tip and their shape because they start to fray or like start to break at the very end of it. But for the most part, I had no problems with it, and I kind of went ham with it when I was working on Tinari's piece, and all three are still intact. So when I was working with the blue for Goro, I actually only used the brush tip. So you can see that you can still get thin lines, you can get thicker lines. So I love the versatility of this, and it makes me a lot less scared to use like brush tip markers for any kind of like sketching or for line work. So it's just fun to use, and I decided to also show a little bit of that yellow for his skin or for like the gold areas, as well as just adding some kind of a drop shadow for him. And I used the brush tip again once to do the face at the very end, and then I go back in with the fine liner just in case if I want a little bit more control to darken up some of those lines. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video and watching me do about 4 illustrations today. And if you're interested in checking out any of these supplies, like if you're looking for a watercolor pad block for painting, or if you're looking for any kind of these fine liner brush pen sets, do check out the link in the description for each of the products if you're interested in checking out Etchr Lab. And thank you again to Etchr Lab for sending me these products for me to test out. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!